The Last Watch, a night on the edge of the Roman Empire. Part 1. The Wall in the Fog. The fog came slowly that night, rolling down from the northern hills like a soft gray river. It settled over the wooden watchtower, quiet and patient, as if it too were waiting for something. Marcus stood at his post, one hand resting on the cold stone of the parapet. 30 years of service had taught him to listen more than he watched, and tonight the world was very still. Tomorrow he would be discharged. Tomorrow, after 3 decades under the Eagle standard, he would finally lay down his shield. Somewhere below the wall, a torch flickered in the wind. The flame bent, steadied, and bent again, casting long shadows across the timber. It was the year 117 in the reign of the Emperor Trajan. Rome had never been larger and her legions had never been stronger. From the sands of Egypt to the misty hills of Britannia, from the deserts near Parthia to the cold rivers of Dacia, the empire stretched further than any before it. And here on this quiet frontier, 2 men stood guard through the night. One was young, one was old. Only the old one is our story. Marcus adjusted the weight of his cloak and breathed in slowly. The air smelled of damp earth and distant pine. He had stood 1,000 watches before this one, but something about tonight felt different, though he could not yet say why. A soft wind moved through the fog, gentle and unhurried. Somewhere far below, a wolf called once, then fell silent again. The sound reached back through the years, further than Marcus expected. It carried him quietly to a night many winters ago. He closed his eyes for just a moment, letting the memory rise on its own. There was no need to chase it. It was already coming to him. This is the story of that last night. Not the story of a man's final hours, but the story of an empire seen once more through his tired eyes. Each sound on the wall would open a door in his memory. Each door would lead him gently through the life he had lived. And by morning, when the sun finally rose over the eastern hills, Marcus would understand something he had never understood before. But that was still hours away. For now, there was only the fog, the torchlight, and the low, patient hum of the frontier at rest. Part 2. The Wolf's Call. The wolf's cry faded into the hills, soft and distant, like a memory calling out on its own. Marcus let it carry him backward gently to the beginning. He had been 17 when he first joined the Legion, standing in a long line of nervous young men outside a recruiting office in northern Italy. The officer had measured his height, checked his teeth, and asked if he could read and write. Marcus could do both, which was rare enough to be noted. He remembered the oath most clearly. Every recruit swore loyalty to the emperor and to Rome, a promise called the sacramentum, spoken with a steady voice. After the oath came the training, and the training was long. New soldiers marched with double the weight of a normal pack to build strength before battle ever came. A legionary on the march carried nearly 30 kilograms. Armor, weapons, rations, a cloak, and tools for building camp all rested on his shoulders. They called these men Marius's mules, a nickname from centuries earlier, when a general named Marius had reformed the army to carry its own supplies. On a good road in good weather, A legion could cover about 25 kilometers in a single day. It was steady work, not fast, but relentless. Marcus remembered his first long march into Germania, through dense forest where the sun barely reached the ground. The trees there felt older than Rome itself. The Germanic tribes fought differently than the enemies Rome usually faced. They rarely met the legion in open battle, preferring ambush among the trees. He remembered the fear in that forest, quiet and constant, like a held breath. Every shadow seemed to move, though most of them never did. His centurion, a scarred veteran named Gaius, told him something he never forgot. Fear was not weakness, Gaius said. Fear was simply a soldier paying attention. That first winter was cold beyond anything Marcus had known in Italy. The frost came early, and the rivers froze hard enough to walk across. Life on campaign was slow between the moments of danger. Long days of marching, followed by the building of a fortified camp every single night. Even for one night's rest, the legion dug a ditch and raised a wooden wall. Discipline was not only for battle, it was for survival itself. Marcus remembered how tired his arms had been after those first months. His hands blistered from the shovel more than from the sword. But slowly, quietly, his body changed. The pack grew lighter, not because it weighed less, but because he had grown strong enough to carry it. The wolf cried again, further away now, fading gently into the fog. And with it, that first memory settled back into the quiet of the past. Marcus opened his eyes and found himself again on the wall, the torch still flickering, the young guard still standing silently a few paces away. Part 3. Mountains of Dacia. A gust of wind moved across the tower, cool and steady, carrying the scent of stone and distant snow. It reminded Marcus of mountains far to the east. Years after Germania, Marcus had marched with Trajan's army into Dacia, a rugged land across the great river Danube, ruled by a king named Decebalus. The Dacian wars were fought for gold as much as for glory. Dacia held rich mines, and its people had resisted Rome for many years. Marcus remembered the mountains most of all, steep and silent, wrapped in cold mist much like the fog that covered his tower tonight. Roman engineers built roads and bridges through that difficult land, work that Marcus found almost as impressive as any battle he had fought. One bridge, built across the Danube by an architect named Apollodorus, was said to be the longest in the world at that time. Life on that campaign taught Marcus about the quieter parts of army life, the parts rarely spoken of around a campfire but deeply felt. A legionary's pay was modest, paid 3 times a year, though much of it was already spent before it reached his hands. Deductions came first for food, for equipment, and for a burial fund, a small but steady comfort against an uncertain future. Discipline in camp was strict, and punishments could be harsh. Minor faults brought extra duties. Serious ones brought public beatings, or worse, before the whole unit. Yet within that strictness, there was also a quiet kind of brotherhood. Soldiers shared tents in groups of 8, called a contubernium, cooking and eating together. Marcus remembered long evenings by the fire in Dacia, when the fighting paused and the men simply talked, softly, about home and about hope. The Dacian warriors fought fiercely, using a curved blade called the falx, capable of cutting through a soldier's shield with a single heavy blow. It was because of that weapon that Roman armor slowly changed, growing stronger at the shoulders, offering more protection than it once had. Marcus had seen good men fall in those mountains, and he had learned slowly how to carry that weight without letting it break him. In the end, Dacia became a Roman province, its gold flowing back to Rome, its people slowly woven into the wide fabric of the empire. The wind faded, and with it, the mountains faded too. Marcus stood again in the quiet fog, his breath slow, his hands steady on the stone. Part 4. Sands of Egypt. A dying ember in the brazier beside him cracked softly, sending a small curl of smoke into the fog. The scent of ash reminded him of another fire, far away. After Dacia, Marcus had been sent south, to Egypt, a province that felt like another world entirely, warm and golden even in winter. He remembered the Nile most clearly, wide and slow, its water a gentle green under the desert sun, feeding fields that stretched for miles. Garrison life in Egypt was calmer than campaign life in the north. The days followed a steady rhythm of drills, patrols, and quiet administrative work. Food here was different from anywhere else Marcus had served. Wheat was abundant and bread, the true foundation of a soldier's diet, was plentiful and good. A legionary's daily ration was mostly grain, ground and baked into hard bread, or boiled into a simple porridge called pools when time was short. Alongside the bread came vinegar mixed with water, a drink called pasca, refreshing and mildly sour, favored by soldiers on long marches. Meat was rare on most days, though soldiers ate cheese, olives, and dried fruit when they could get them from local markets nearby. Marcus remembered Egyptian markets full of unfamiliar scents, cumin and coriander, dates and figs, sold by merchants speaking a language he never fully learned. Religion here felt layered and old. Roman soldiers worshipped their own gods, yet many also came to respect the ancient gods of Egypt, quietly, without conflict. He remembered praying to Mithras in a small underground temple, a private soldier's faith, promising protection and courage before difficult days ahead. Other men lit candles for Isis, or left small offerings near old temples, blending traditions the way soldiers so often blend the customs of far places. Marcus found a strange peace in that mixture of beliefs. Faith, he came to think, was less about which god one prayed to and more about comfort. Even now, standing in the fog, he touched a small pendant beneath his tunic, worn smooth by 30 years of quiet, private prayer. The ember beside him faded fully into gray ash, its warmth gone. Marcus looked up, and the memory of Egypt faded gently along with it. The fog outside had thickened slightly, wrapping the tower in a deeper, softer silence, as if the night itself were slowing down to listen. Part 5. Reign over Britannia. A light rain began to fall, soft and steady, tapping gently against the wooden roof above the tower. Marcus welcomed the sound. It reminded him of Britannia. He had served there for nearly 6 years on the far, damp edge of the empire, where the sky seemed to rain more often than it did not. The land was green in a way Marcus had never seen before, hills rolling endlessly beneath low clouds, quiet and beautiful, if often cold. His armor changed with the climate. In Britannia, Marcus wore the larica segmentata, a design of overlapping iron bands fitted across the chest and shoulders. It was lighter than older male armor, and it distributed weight more evenly. Still, it needed careful maintenance, or the rain would rust it quickly. Underneath, soldiers wore a padded tunic, which helped prevent the metal from chafing the skin, especially on long, wet marches through difficult terrain. On his feet, Marcus wore caligae, sturdy leather sandals reinforced with iron studs, designed to grip the ground and last through thousands of miles of walking. They looked strange to modern eyes, open sandals in a cold, wet climate, yet they were surprisingly practical, allowing feet to dry more easily after rain. In truly cold weather, soldiers wrapped their feet in wool and later added simple socks, a small comfort against the endless British damp. Marcus remembered patrols along the northern frontier, where a great wall was being planned, though it would not be completed until years after Trajan's reign. The local tribes were proud and fierce, painted sometimes in blue dye before battle, fighting with a wild energy that Roman discipline slowly learned to counter. Yet many Britons in time came to live peacefully alongside the garrisons, trading grain and wool for Roman coin, slowly blending two very different worlds. He remembered one evening, sheltering from a storm in a small roadside inn, sharing bread with a local farmer who spoke broken Latin and laughed easily. That night taught Marcus something quiet but important. Even at the edge of the world, ordinary kindness could still be found, warm and unremarkable like a fire. The rain outside the tower slowed, then stopped, leaving only the soft drip of water falling from the eaves into the dark grass below. Marcus wiped a drop of rain from his brow and breathed out slowly, letting Britannia fade gently back into the quiet folds of memory. Part 6. The Owl on the Tower. An owl landed softly on the edge of the tower, its wings nearly silent, its eyes catching the last light of the torch below. Marcus watched it for a long moment. It reminded him gently of the woman he had left behind in Rome many years and many miles ago. Her name was Livia. They had married just before his second posting, young and hopeful, with little more than a small rented room and quiet plans. Soldiers of his rank were not officially permitted to marry during service, though many, like Marcus, formed families anyway, quietly in the shadow of the rule. He wrote to her often, letters carried slowly along the Cursus Publicus, the imperial road system, sometimes taking months to reach her small home. Her replies came just as slowly, filled with small details he treasured. A new neighbor, a good harvest, their daughter's first uncertain steps, Marcus had missed so much quietly across the years. Birthdays, illnesses, ordinary evenings he could only imagine from a cold tent far from home. Yet Livia never once asked him to leave the Legion early. She understood, as many soldiers' wives did, that his service was also his living and his purpose. He remembered his fear at night, not of barbarians or battle, but of being forgotten slowly by the people who mattered most to him. To calm that fear, Marcus prayed each evening, sometimes to Mars for courage, sometimes to the household gods, the Lares, for his family's quiet safety. He kept a small wooden token from Livia tucked always beneath his armor, worn smooth by years of touching it before every difficult march. Now, with retirement only hours away, Marcus would finally return to her, to a small plot of land promised to veterans after honorable discharge. He wondered, quietly, if she had changed as much as he had. 30 years was a long time, long enough to become almost a stranger. Yet love, he thought, was patient in its own way, much like the owl above him, still and watchful, waiting calmly for the right moment. The owl shifted its wings once, then flew silently into the fog, disappearing as quietly as it had come, leaving only a soft rustle behind. Marcus smiled faintly, a tired, warm smile, and turned his eyes back toward the mist, where his memories continued to gather, slow and patient. Part 7, Shapes in the Mist. Somewhere beyond the wall, in the deep gray fog, something moved. Marcus straightened slightly, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. He had faced many barbarian tribes across his years of service, and he had learned that fear of them was often larger than the truth. Roman writers sometimes described these tribes as wild and formless, yet Marcus had seen their villages, their families, their quiet, ordinary daily lives. The Germanic peoples wore long trousers and heavy cloaks, well suited to their cold forests, very different from the light tunics favored by Romans. Many carried spears rather than swords, simple weapons that were cheaper to make and easier to use for a farmer called suddenly into battle. Their warriors often fought bare-chested, believing it showed courage, a custom that Roman soldiers found both puzzling and, quietly, rather brave. Dacian warriors, by contrast, wore curved caps that marked their rank, and carried the fearsome falcons that had once reshaped Roman armor design. Marcus remembered trading briefly with a Germanic family near the frontier, exchanging Roman wine for local furs, both sides cautious, both sides curious. The woman of that family had offered him warm bread, and her children had stared at his armor with wide, innocent, unafraid eyes. It struck him then, quietly, that these were not monsters from old stories, but people living their lives, much as his own family lived in Rome. Still, tensions were real, and battles were often brutal. Trust between Rome and these tribes was a fragile thing, built slowly and broken easily. Rome's frontier, the limes, was not simply a wall of stone, but a long living boundary of forts, roads, and careful, watchful diplomacy. Marcus had served under officers who preferred negotiation to battle whenever possible, understanding that peace, though slower, often held longer than victory. Tonight, the shape in the fog did not move closer and it did not speak. It simply remained distant and still, like a shadow at rest. Marcus watched it a while longer, calm rather than afraid, remembering that even the unknown, given enough patience, often reveals itself gently in time. He turned his eyes back to the torch, letting the warmth settle his thoughts, while the shape in the mist waited quietly, unmoving beyond the wall. Part 8. The Watchword. A bell rang softly somewhere within the fort, marking the changing of the hour, slow and steady, like a heartbeat beneath the fog. Marcus glanced at the young soldier beside him, barely 18, standing straight despite the late hour, still eager in the way only new recruits could be. Night watches were divided into 4 parts called vigiliae, each lasting roughly 3 hours, carefully timed by water clocks kept within the fort. Every watch required a password called the tessera, a single word written on a small wooden tablet, passed quietly from post to post each night. The word changed daily, chosen by the commanding officer, and any guard unable to give it correctly faced serious consequences under Roman military law. Marcus remembered his own first watch, decades ago, and how terrified he had been of forgetting a simple word under the weight of the darkness. Discipline on watch was absolute. Falling asleep on duty was considered one of the gravest offenses a soldier could commit, punishable severely, sometimes fatally. Yet this harshness existed for good reason. A sleeping guard could mean the death of an entire camp, and Roman law valued the many over the one. Beyond the tessera, soldiers used other signals in the dark, a soft whistle, a specific knock, small sounds meant only for those who belonged. Marcus had learned to read the night itself as a kind of language, the rustle of leaves, the call of birds, each telling its own quiet story. He thought of Gaius, his old centurion long since retired, who used to say that a good guard listens with his whole body, not only his ears. Over the years, Marcus had become exactly that kind of soldier, calm, alert, and unshaken, trusted with the quietest and most important watches of the night. Tonight, the young soldier beside him whispered the tessera under his breath, checking it once more, nervous energy still fresh in his young voice. Marcus nodded to him gently, a small gesture of reassurance, remembering clearly what it felt like to stand this same wall for the very first time. The bell fell silent again, and the fort settled back into its steady hush, the fog pressing close, patient, around the wooden tower. Part 9. The Empire at its height. The fog shifted slightly, and for a moment, Marcus could see further than before, out toward the dark hills where the frontier road disappeared into the night. Under Trajan, Rome had reached the widest borders it would ever hold, stretching from the cold rivers of Britannia to the warm sands of Mesopotamia. Trajan himself was a soldier before he was an emperor, a man who had marched with his legions rather than simply commanding them from afar. Marcus had seen him once briefly during the Dacian campaign, a calm, steady figure moving among the ranks, speaking easily with common soldiers like Marcus. That memory had stayed with him for years, a quiet reminder that even the most powerful man in the world could still walk among ordinary men. Rome's government relied on a vast network of roads, nearly 80,000 kilometers in total, connecting provinces that spoke dozens of different languages. Governors administered each province, supported by local councils, tax collectors, and garrisons like the one where Marcus now stood his final watch. The legions themselves, some 30 in total across the empire, formed the backbone of this order, each one roughly 5,000 men strong. Marcus's own legion had marched under many different skies, yet it always carried the same eagle standard, the Aquila, sacred and irreplaceable to every soldier. Losing the eagle in battle was considered a shame so great that entire legions had once been disbanded rather than continue without it. He remembered the pride he felt each time their eagle was raised at dawn, catching the first light, a small but powerful symbol of unity. Political life in Rome itself felt distant to a frontier soldier, yet even Marcus understood the careful balance the Senate and Emperor maintained together. Trajan was remembered for building projects as much as conquest, forums, markets, aqueducts, works meant to outlast any single reign, including his own. Marcus had once visited Trajan's new forum in Rome, awed by its size, quietly proud that his own service had helped make such peace and wealth possible. Now, standing on this quiet frontier, Marcus understood his own small place within that vast structure, one soldier among hundreds of thousands, holding one small wall. The fog closed in again softly, hiding the road once more, as the empire around him slept wide and warm beneath a watchful ancient night. Part 10. The Signal Fires. Somewhere along the ridge to the east, a single point of orange light flickered briefly, then steadied, small and bright against the retreating dark. Marcus watched it for a long moment, recognizing it instantly as a beacon fire, part of a chain of signals stretching for many miles along the frontier. Rome's border was never only stone and soldiers. It was also light and sound, a living network built to carry warning faster than any messenger could run. A single fire, lit atop a distant tower, could pass a warning from one watch post to the next, crossing great distances within a single hour. Marcus remembered the strict rules governing these fires, each pattern of flame carrying its own meaning, understood only by those trained to read them. One long fire meant calm. 2 short fires meant movement in the forest. 3 fires together meant an enemy force approaching in real strength. He had once helped light such a fire himself during a tense night in Germania, when scouts reported movement along a shadowed tree line nearby. The waiting after lighting a beacon was its own kind of trial, quiet and tense, every soldier watching the dark for signs of what might follow. That night, the movement had turned out to be deer, not warriors, and the fort had laughed quietly with relief once the sun finally rose. Still, the system worked because soldiers respected it fully, never lighting a fire without cause, never ignoring one lit by another distant post. Trust, Marcus had learned, was the true foundation beneath every signal fire, every watchword, every quiet agreement holding the frontier together through the darkest hours. Tonight, the small light on the ridge remained steady, calm, unthreatening, simply another post confirming quietly that all along the line remained at peace. Marcus allowed himself a small, tired smile at the sight of it, a single point of warmth in the great, cool stretch of the waking dawn. Communication, more than any weapon, had kept this frontier standing for so many years, connecting lonely towers like his into one long, unbroken chain. He thought of all the men he would never meet, standing similar watches on similar towers, tied to him only by fire, distance, and shared duty. It was, he realized, its own quiet kind of brotherhood, stretching far beyond his own small fort, out across the whole wide breathing body of the empire. Part 11. The Fort. A faint smell of metal drifted up from the armory below, sharp and familiar, mixing gently with the fading scent of night rain on stone. It reminded Marcus of the forges he had visited many times over the years, hot, loud places where Roman equipment was made, repaired, and carefully maintained. Each legion traveled with its own smiths, called fabri, skilled craftsmen who could repair armor, sharpen blades, and even build small siege engines when required. The standard sword of a legionary, the gladius, was short compared to other weapons of the time, designed for close, controlled thrusting rather than wide swinging. Marcus remembered training for months simply to master its balance, learning that a short blade, used well, could be far deadlier than a longer one. Alongside the gladius, soldiers carried the pilum, a heavy throwing spear designed with a soft iron shank that bent upon impact, ruining enemy shields instantly. This clever design meant an enemy could not simply pick up the spear and throw it back, a small advantage that often decided close battles. Shields, called scuda, were large and curved, built from layered wood and leather, strong enough to stop a blade yet light enough to carry all day. Marcus remembered the testudo formation, soldiers locking their shields together into a solid shell, protecting the group from arrows falling from above. Training in that formation had been exhausting, shoulders pressed tightly together, moving as one single, patient creature rather than many separate men. He remembered the first time it truly saved his life, arrows striking the shield above his head instead of finding softer, unprotected flesh. Armor and weapons needed constant care, oiled against rust, sharpened against dullness, inspected often by officers who tolerated no carelessness in these matters. A soldier's equipment was, in many ways, his second family, trusted daily, cared for nightly, carried faithfully across thousands of miles of hard road. Marcus glanced down at his own worn shield, dented in places, its paint faded, yet still solid, still steady after 30 years of quiet service. Tomorrow he would hand it back to the armory, a small, strange sorrow settling gently in his chest at the thought of finally letting it go. Part 12. The Field Hospital. A soft cough sounded from somewhere near the fort's small hospital building, reminding Marcus, gently, of the quiet, careful world of Roman military medicine. Every legion traveled with a valetudinarium, a proper hospital building, staffed by trained medical officers who understood wounds, fevers, and the slow business of healing. Roman military doctors were surprisingly skilled, using clean instruments, herbal remedies, and surgical techniques developed and refined across many years of hard experience. Marcus remembered a physician named Apollonius, calm and steady-handed, who had once removed an arrowhead from his shoulder with careful, patient precision. Wine was used to clean wounds, along with vinegar, both possessing properties that helped prevent infection, even though the soldiers of that time did not fully understand why. Bandages were boiled before use, and physicians washed their hands and instruments carefully, following practices passed down through generations of careful military medicine. Recovering soldiers rested in quiet wards, fed simple broths and bread, cared for by orderlies until they were strong enough to return to duty. Marcus remembered the long weeks of his own recovery in Dacia, frustrated at his weakness, comforted only by quiet conversations with other healing soldiers nearby. It was there he had learned patience, truly learned it, understanding that healing, like marching, was simply another kind of steady, quiet discipline. Roman medicine also understood the importance of clean water, and forts were carefully built near reliable springs, with proper drainage to prevent disease from spreading. Bathhouses, found even in small frontier forts, were considered essential rather than luxurious, helping maintain the health and morale of the entire garrison. Marcus remembered the simple pleasure of a hot bath after a long, cold march, heat easing muscles that ached from weeks of hard marching. Even tonight, before his final watch, he had visited the fort's small baths, letting the warm water calm both his tired body and his restless mind. Health, he had come to understand, was as much a part of a soldier's strength as any sword, quietly protected by careful, patient Roman practice. The cough from the hospital faded into silence, and Marcus turned his attention back to the brightening sky, grateful, quietly, for 30 years of steady health. Part 13. Bread and the Fleet. Far below the fort, a cart creaked slowly along the frontier road, carrying supplies toward the granary, its wheels groaning softly over uneven stone. The sound reminded Marcus of Ostia, the great port near Rome, where he had once been stationed briefly, guarding warehouses filled with grain from distant Egypt. Rome itself, a city of over 1 million people, could not feed itself from the surrounding countryside alone, and depended heavily on grain shipped from overseas. Massive ships called naves honorariae carried Egyptian wheat across the Mediterranean, their holds packed carefully to prevent shifting weight from capsizing the vessel. Marcus remembered the scale of it. Dozens of ships arriving through the sailing season, feeding not only citizens, but also the legions stationed far from Italy. A special grain dole, the annona, provided free or subsidized wheat to poorer citizens in Rome, a policy meant to maintain peace within the crowded city. Soldiers, too, depended on this same supply chain, grain shipped, stored, and distributed along military roads to garrisons scattered across the empire's edges. Marcus had guarded grain warehouses during storms, when ships were delayed, and tension in the city grew thick with worry over bread that had not yet arrived. He remembered one particular autumn when late storms nearly emptied the granaries, and soldiers quietly wondered if their own rations might soon be reduced. The ships arrived just in time that year, and Marcus remembered the quiet, communal relief that spread through the port when the sails finally appeared. It taught him something about the fragile machinery beneath Rome's strength, a system of ships, roads, and careful administration, easily disrupted, yet remarkably resilient. Engineers built granaries with raised floors and thick walls, protecting grain from moisture and vermin, preserving it safely for months at a time. Marcus had always respected the quiet work of supply officers, men rarely praised in stories, yet utterly essential to every soldier's daily survival. Without steady bread, he often thought, no legion could march far and no city could remain calm, no matter how strong its walls might be. The cart below finally reached the granary gate, and the soft creaking faded into the fort's other quiet morning sounds, steady and unremarkable. Part 14. The Festival Fire. Somewhere within the fort, a soldier hummed a quiet tune, half-remembered, drifting up faintly through the cool morning air toward the tower where Marcus stood. The melody reminded him of Saturnalia, a festival held each December when normal Roman rules briefly softened, and even soldiers allowed themselves simple, warm celebration. During Saturnalia, masters and servants sometimes traded roles for a day, gifts were exchanged, and candles were lit against the darkest days of winter. Even on the frontier, far from Rome's public festivities, soldiers marked the occasion quietly, sharing extra rations, wine, and rare moments of unguarded laughter. Marcus remembered one Saturnalia in Britannia, huddled around a large fire with his contubernium, singing old songs while rain fell steadily outside their tent. Such festivals offered a brief release from the discipline that shaped every other day, a reminder that soldiers were still, underneath their armor, simply men. Other days marked the calendar too. The emperor's birthday, the founding of Rome, and various religious festivals honoring gods tied to war, harvest, or home. Each legion maintained its own religious calendar, overseen by officers responsible for sacrifices, prayers, and the careful maintenance of the standards themselves. Marcus remembered sacrifices made before major campaigns, animals offered to secure favor from the gods, the smell of smoke mixing with quiet, hopeful prayers. Whether or not every soldier believed deeply in these rituals, most respected them, understanding that shared ceremony helped bind a legion together as one body. He remembered feeling during these festivals a warmth distinct from any campfire, a sense of belonging that stretched beyond any single battle or border. Tonight, no festival was planned, yet the soldiers' quiet humming carried some of that same warmth, small and steady, into the cool morning air. Marcus listened until the tune faded, replaced again by the ordinary sounds of a fort slowly waking, boots on wood, distant voices, a horse stirring nearby. Even ordinary mornings, he thought, carried their own quiet music, if a man simply took the time after 30 years to finally listen closely. Part 15. The Triumph. A distant memory stirred, unprompted, of trumpets and crowds, roaring somewhere far away in the wide streets of Rome itself, bright with color and noise. Marcus had witnessed a triumph only once, a grand procession celebrating victory in Dacia, when Trajan himself rode through cheering streets lined with citizens. A triumph was among the highest honors Rome could grant a general, a public celebration marking a significant military victory, rich with ceremony and tradition. Captured treasures were displayed for the crowds, alongside prisoners, and soldiers marched proudly behind their commander, receiving rare public recognition for their service. Marcus remembered the noise most vividly, deafening and joyful, unlike anything he had experienced on any battlefield, warm rather than fearful, celebratory rather than tense. He had marched near the rear of that procession, tired from the long journey home, yet lifted, quietly, by the sheer warmth of the welcome. Behind the celebration, however, Roman politics remained complex and delicate, with the Senate and Emperor maintaining a careful, sometimes uneasy, balance of power. Trajan was respected for consulting the Senate more than some previous emperors, a choice that earned him lasting goodwill among Rome's political class. Marcus, as a common soldier, understood little of the finer details of Senate debate, yet he understood loyalty, and loyalty to Trajan came easily. He remembered the emperor's simple manner among the ranks, sharing meals occasionally with common soldiers, a gesture that meant more to Marcus than any speech. Political stability, Marcus had come to understand, mattered as much to a frontier soldier as any battle, since instability in Rome often meant delayed pay. The empire's peace, called by some the Pax Romana, rested on this quiet balance between military strength, political wisdom, and careful, patient governance. Marcus felt no need to understand every detail of that balance. It was enough, he thought, to have served faithfully beneath it for 30 years. The memory of trumpets faded slowly, replaced once more by the quiet hush of fog and stone, and the soft, steady sound of his own breathing. Part 16. The Veterans' Land. A distant rooster called from beyond the fort walls, ordinary and unremarkable, yet it reminded Marcus, softly, of the small farm awaiting him after discharge. Veterans of Rome's legions were promised land or a cash payment upon honorable retirement, a system meant to reward decades of loyal, difficult service. Marcus had chosen land, a modest plot near a growing veteran colony, not far from where Livia now lived, waiting patiently for his return. These veteran colonies served a double purpose, rewarding soldiers fairly while also strengthening Roman presence and stability across various provinces of the empire. Marcus had visited his allotted land only once years earlier, walking its quiet boundaries, imagining distantly the small house he might someday build there. He pictured olive trees, a modest garden, perhaps a few animals, a peaceful, unhurried life after 3 decades of marching, watching, and careful discipline. Many veterans continued serving their communities in smaller ways, becoming local officials, respected elders, or simply quiet, steady examples for younger generations nearby. Marcus wondered what kind of veteran he might become, uncertain, quietly, how a man used to strict discipline would adjust to slower, softer days. He remembered older veterans he had once known, calm and settled, their old scars fading slowly, their stories softening gently with each passing year. Perhaps, he thought, that same calm awaited him too, patience earned honestly through 30 years of service, ready now to be enjoyed rather than endured. The rooster called again, closer this time, and Marcus allowed himself quietly to imagine mornings much like this one, waking slowly beside Livia without armor. It was a small, warm thought, gentle and steady, carrying him closer toward the sunrise now spreading fully across the eastern hills beyond the wall. 30 years, he thought, had prepared him carefully for this quieter chapter, patient and unhurried, much like the slow lifting of tonight's gentle fog. Part 17. The March Formation. Far below, a small column of soldiers moved slowly across the yard, forming neat, practiced lines despite the early, sleepy hour of the morning. Watching them reminded Marcus of the long marches of his youth, when an entire legion moved together as one long, disciplined, watchful body. A legion on the march traveled in careful order, scouts ranging ahead, cavalry on the flanks, and the heavy infantry marching steadily at its center. Auxiliary troops, recruited from provinces across the empire, often marched alongside the legions, bringing skills the citizen soldiers themselves sometimes lacked. Marcus remembered archers from Syria, their bows curved and unfamiliar, capable of striking targets far beyond the reach of any Roman javelin. He remembered cavalry from Gaul and Numidia, riders skilled since childhood, moving swiftly around the column's edges, watching for any sign of ambush. These auxiliary soldiers were not Roman citizens when they enlisted, yet after 25 years of honest service, citizenship was granted to them and their children. Marcus had watched such ceremonies himself, proud auxiliary veterans receiving a small bronze tablet, a diploma confirming their new and permanent place within the empire. It struck him, quietly, how Rome grew not only through conquest, but through this slow, patient invitation, drawing loyal soldiers fully into its wide embrace. The standard bearer, called the aquilifer, held a place of great honor near the column's center, protecting the legion's eagle with fierce, unwavering pride. Marcus remembered a young aquilifer in Dacia who held his ground bravely even as chaos surrounded him, refusing absolutely to let the standard fall. Music, too, guided the march, horns and drums signaling commands across the noise of thousands of moving feet, boots, and creaking supply wagons. A well-trained legion could shift formation quickly, from marching column into battle line, using these same signals, practiced patiently over countless hours of drill. Marcus had drilled these formations so many times that his body still remembered them, muscle and bone recalling patterns his mind barely needed anymore. Watching the young soldiers below now, moving through their own quiet drills, Marcus felt a familiar, steady pride settle gently across his tired shoulders. Part 18. The Cursus Publicus. A rider passed swiftly along the frontier road below, disappearing quickly into the last patches of morning fog, his horse moving at a steady, practiced trot. Marcus watched him go, recognizing the pace immediately as that of an imperial courier, part of the Cursus Publicus, Rome's official postal and transport system. This network of relay stations, spaced roughly a day's ride apart, allowed messages and officials to travel quickly across the empire's vast distances. Fresh horses waited at each station, allowing couriers to maintain their pace without exhausting a single animal across the entire length of their journey. Marcus remembered how vital this system had felt during his years of service, carrying orders, supply requests, and most importantly to him, letters from home. A letter from Livia, carried along this careful chain of riders and stations, might travel hundreds of miles before finally reaching his cold frontier post. He remembered the quiet joy of receiving her letters, reading them slowly by firelight, sometimes several times, before carefully folding them away again. Writing materials were simple: wax tablets for quick notes or papyrus and ink for longer letters, carefully sealed before being handed to a passing courier. Marcus had learned to write clearly and simply, understanding that his words might travel a great distance before reaching eyes that missed him deeply. The system also carried official reports, informing Rome of troop movements, harvests, or unrest, allowing the emperor to govern a vast empire with real information. Without such communication, Marcus often thought, an empire this size could not hold together, no matter how strong its legions or how solid its walls. He remembered once carrying an urgent message himself, chosen for his steady horsemanship, riding through a long night much like this one, alert and focused. That journey had taught him respect for every courier he later saw passing swiftly along a frontier road, carrying words that mattered more than gold. The rider below finally vanished around a bend, his hoofbeats fading into the morning quiet, leaving only the soft, steady birdsong that followed behind him. Marcus turned back toward the brightening sky, grateful, quietly, for a system that had carried Livia's voice to him across so many difficult years. Part 19. The Law of the Camp. A soft murmur of voices rose from below, two officers discussing quietly the day's coming duties, their tone calm, ordered and familiar to Marcus after years of service. Roman military law, distinct from civilian law, governed every part of a soldier's life, from daily conduct to the gravest matters of battlefield discipline. Officers called the tribunes and the legatus oversaw discipline within the legion, supported by centurions who managed the daily conduct of their own smaller units. Minor offenses, such as poor equipment maintenance, brought extra duties or reduced rations, small but steady reminders of the discipline holding the legion together. More serious offenses, such as theft from a fellow soldier, brought harsher punishment, sometimes public beatings administered before the assembled unit as a clear warning. Marcus remembered witnessing decimation only in old stories, a brutal punishment for mass mutiny, rare even in Rome's long history, reserved for the gravest failures. Thankfully, he had never served under a legion so disgraced, and such punishment remained for him only a distant, sobering lesson from military history. Desertion was treated with particular severity, since the safety of the entire unit depended on every soldier remaining steady and present during difficult moments. Marcus remembered a young soldier once tempted to desert during a difficult winter, talked calmly out of it by Gaius, who understood fear without excusing it. That soldier went on to serve honorably for many more years, a quiet reminder that discipline, applied with wisdom, could guide a frightened man back toward courage. Rewards existed alongside punishment. Bravery in battle earned decorations, torques, medals, and sometimes promotion, small tokens carrying great weight within a soldier's proud memory. Marcus still kept a small silver decoration from his time in Dacia, earned for steady conduct during a difficult night much like this very one. He touched it now, briefly, beneath his armor, remembering the quiet pride he felt the day it was placed carefully into his open hand. Law and discipline, he had come to understand, were not simply about punishment, but about protecting the fragile trust that held thousands of men together. Without that trust, he thought, no wall, however tall, and no sword, however sharp, could ever truly keep a frontier safe through a long, dark night. Part 20. The Provinces at Peace. Somewhere beyond the fort, a farmer's cart rattled steadily along a side road, ordinary and unremarkable, carrying vegetables toward a small nearby market town. The sound reminded Marcus how much had changed across the provinces he had served in, slowly transforming from contested frontiers into settled working communities. Roman roads, originally built for the movement of legions, soon carried merchants, farmers, and travelers, knitting distant regions gently into one shared, growing economy. Towns grew steadily near old forts, offering baths, markets, and small theaters, blending Roman customs with local traditions in ways unique to each region. Marcus remembered a British town he had once patrolled, its market filled with both Roman pottery and local woven goods, sold side by side without conflict. Latin spread gradually through these regions, not by force alone, but through trade, administration, and the simple daily convenience of a shared common language. Local elites often took Roman citizenship eagerly, adopting Roman dress and customs while still honoring their own older gods and cherished family traditions. Marcus had noticed, quietly, that peace often did more to spread Roman culture than any single victorious battle ever could across a generation. He remembered veterans settling permanently in these provinces, marrying local women, raising children who felt equally at home in both worlds, blended and steady. This slow blending, Marcus believed, was quietly one of Rome's greatest strengths, patient and unglamorous, yet far more lasting than any single military triumph. Fields once fought over now produced grain, wine, and wool, feeding both local families and the wider empire that had once conquered them by force. Marcus had seen old battlefields transformed completely into peaceful farmland, grass growing calmly over ground that had once run red during his younger years. It gave him a quiet, steady hope, thinking of the frontier he now guarded, imagining it too becoming someday a peaceful farming region much like these. Perhaps, he thought, that was the truest victory a soldier like himself could hope for, not conquest, but the slow, patient birth of lasting peace. The farmer's cart rattled onward, disappearing gently around a bend, leaving behind only the soft, steady birdsong of a morning settling calmly into daylight. Part 21. The Canabae. Beyond the fort's main gate, a small cluster of buildings stood quietly in the pale morning light, home to the civilian settlement called the Canabae. Marcus had lived near such settlements for much of his career, small communities of traders, craftsmen, and families that grew naturally beside every permanent fort. Though soldiers were not officially permitted to marry, many formed lasting relationships with local women, raising children quietly within these unofficial frontier communities. Livia herself had lived for a time near one such settlement before returning to Rome, close enough that Marcus could visit during rare, precious moments of leave. These settlements offered goods soldiers could not get through official supply: fresh vegetables, local beer, mended clothing, and simple, welcome companionship after hard duty. Marcus remembered a blacksmith named Tarvos, a local craftsman who repaired his gear for years, becoming quietly something close to a trusted old friend. Merchants traveled from distant provinces to trade at these settlements, bringing goods soldiers rarely saw otherwise: spices, fine cloth, and small comforts from home. Children grew up here surrounded by soldiers of many backgrounds, learning bits of Latin alongside their own local language, comfortable moving between both worlds. Marcus often thought these settlements represented Rome at its most human, unofficial, and unplanned, yet warm, resilient, and quietly essential to frontier life. When a fort was eventually abandoned or a legion moved on, many of these communities remained, slowly becoming towns in their own right, permanent and settled. He had seen this happen more than once, a temporary camp slowly becoming a lasting home, long after the legion that first built it had marched away. It was, he thought, another quiet kind of legacy, built not through conquest but through ordinary daily life, shared patiently between soldier and civilian alike. Marcus glanced now toward the small cluster of buildings beyond the gate, wondering, gently, who might live there decades from now, long after his own memory faded. Perhaps a child not yet born would grow up there, unaware that a tired old soldier had once stood watch on the very wall nearby. The thought comforted him, somehow small and steady, much like the fading fog now lifting gently from the rooftops beyond the quiet gate. Part 22. The Navy and the Sea. A faint, familiar smell of salt drifted unexpectedly on the morning breeze, though the sea lay many miles from this quiet inland frontier post. It reminded Marcus of a brief posting years earlier, aboard a patrol vessel of the classis Britannica, guarding the channel waters between Britannia and Gaul. Rome's navy rarely received the same glory as its legions, yet it played a quiet, essential role, protecting trade routes and transporting soldiers safely across water. Marcus remembered the strange rhythm of shipboard life, so different from marching, the deck rolling gently beneath him, the wind constant against his face. Sailors and marines aboard these vessels trained differently than legionaries, focused on boarding actions, coastal patrol, and the careful maintenance of ropes and sails. He remembered his discomfort at first, unused to the sea, though within weeks his body adjusted, finding a new, steady balance beneath his uncertain feet. These naval patrols protected grain shipments, escorted officials, and kept smaller pirate vessels from disrupting the steady flow of trade along the coastline. Marcus recalled one storm distinctly. Waves rising higher than the ship itself seemed built to handle, sailors working calmly despite the frightening, tossing motion. The captain, a calm and experienced man, guided them safely through, reminding Marcus once again that courage often looked less like boldness and more like steadiness. After that posting, Marcus returned to land duty, yet he never forgot the sailors' quiet discipline, so similar to his own, despite their very different world. He remembered thinking, standing once on a foggy deck at night, that a ship's watch felt strangely similar to a night watch on any frontier wall. Both required patience. Both required trust in comrades. Both asked a man to stay alert through long, uneventful hours, waiting quietly for whatever might come. Marcus smiled faintly at the memory, surprised that the smell of salt could reach him even here, so far from any real and open sea. Perhaps, he thought, certain feelings simply belong to every soldier, on land or water, bound together by the same quiet, patient discipline. The salty scent faded slowly, replaced again by the familiar smell of damp earth and fading torch smoke, grounding him once more atop his quiet tower. Part 23. Many tongues, one legion. A group of soldiers below spoke quietly among themselves, their words blending Latin with fragments of other languages, familiar and comforting to Marcus after so many years. His own legion had always been a mixture of peoples: Italians, Gauls, Spaniards, and men from provinces whose names he had only slowly learned to pronounce correctly. Latin served as the legion's common language, taught patiently to new recruits, though many soldiers still carried fragments of their birth language into daily camp life. Marcus remembered learning simple Gaulish phrases from a friend named Boringhistory, useful for trading, and for the easy, warm friendship that grew between them over time. Food, too, blended across these different backgrounds, recipes shared quietly around campfires, each soldier adding a small piece of home to a shared communal pot. He remembered a Spanish soldier who taught him to prepare a spiced fish sauce called garum, strong and salty, transforming even simple bread into something memorable. Religious practices blended as well, soldiers respectfully observing each other's customs, understanding that shared danger mattered more than differences in birth or belief. Marcus had prayed alongside men honoring gods whose names he barely knew, finding comfort simply in shared, quiet reverence before a difficult day ahead. This blending was not always effortless. Disagreements occurred, tempers flared occasionally, yet discipline and shared purpose usually settled disputes before they grew into lasting trouble. Centurions, experienced and steady, understood how to manage these small tensions, treating every soldier fairly regardless of the distant province he had originally come from. Marcus believed quietly that this mixture made the legion stronger rather than weaker, each soldier bringing skills and perspectives that broadened the whole unit's understanding. He thought of Rome itself this way: not one single people, but many peoples bound together by shared law, shared roads, and shared, patient purpose. The legion, in its own small way, mirrored the empire it served, diverse yet disciplined, varied yet unified beneath one steady, common standard. Marcus listened a moment longer to the soldiers' blended conversation below, comforted by its familiar rhythm, before turning his attention back toward the brightening sky. 30 years among so many different men had taught him more about patience and about Rome itself than any single battle ever could have alone. Part 24. Winter Quarters. A light frost still clung to the wooden beams above him, reminding Marcus of the many winters he had spent in what soldiers called hiberna, the winter camp. Campaigning season traditionally paused during the coldest months, when muddy roads and harsh weather made large troop movements slow, dangerous, and often simply impossible. During these months, legions settled into more permanent quarters, strengthening walls, repairing equipment, and resting bodies worn thin by a long season of marching. Marcus remembered winter quarters in Dacia, snow piling high against the timber walls, soldiers gathering close around fires, sharing stories to pass the long, dark evenings. These quiet months allowed injuries to heal fully, equipment to be properly repaired, and new recruits to be trained more thoroughly before spring campaigns resumed. Officers used this time for planning as well, reviewing maps, supply routes, and reports gathered from scouts and local informants across the surrounding region. Marcus recalled long evenings learning to read simple maps himself, tracing rivers and roads by candlelight, slowly understanding the wider shape of the frontier he guarded. Winter also brought its own quiet dangers, sickness spreading more easily in crowded quarters, and morale sometimes dipping under the weight of cold, dark, uneventful days. Officers like Gaius worked hard to keep spirits steady, organizing wrestling matches, storytelling evenings, and small games that kept idle soldiers occupied and calm. Marcus remembered one particularly hard winter when supplies ran short, and the entire camp tightened its rations together, sharing the difficulty without complaint or division. That shared hardship, oddly, strengthened the unit rather than weakening it, each man trusting his comrades a little more once spring finally, gratefully arrived. He remembered the first warm winds of that spring, the relief of muddy roads finally firming enough for the Legion to march once again toward duty. Winter quarters taught Marcus patience of a different kind than battle required, a slower, quieter discipline, waiting steadily for a season to properly turn. Tonight, standing at the edge of another season's ending, he felt that same patient quality settle gently over him, calm and unhurried, much like snowfall. Soon enough, he thought, his own long winter of service would end, and a different kind of spring, quiet and personal, would finally begin for him. Part 25. The Census and the Ledger. Somewhere within the fort's administrative building, a clerk's lamp still burned faintly, illuminating rows of careful records kept meticulously through the long night. Marcus had spent brief periods assisting with such records himself, since his ability to read and write made him useful beyond simple soldiering duties. Rome governed its vast territory partly through careful record-keeping, censuses counting population, property, and wealth, forming the basis for fair and steady taxation. Provincial governors relied on local officials to gather this information, a slow, patient process repeated periodically across every corner of the empire. Marcus remembered helping record supply inventories, grain stores, weapon counts, and equipment conditions, work far less exciting than battle, yet no less important. These records allowed commanders to plan campaigns properly, ensuring enough food, weapons, and reinforcements reached the right place at exactly the right time. He remembered the quiet satisfaction of a well-organized ledger, numbers matching precisely, supplies accounted for fully, nothing lost to carelessness or poor planning. Taxes gathered from provinces funded the legions themselves, alongside roads, aqueducts, and the grain subsidies that kept peace within Rome's crowded city streets. Marcus understood from this small experience how deeply connected his own pay and rations were to distant farmers he would likely never meet. It gave him a quiet respect for the empire's less glamorous workers, clerks, tax collectors and record keepers, whose steady labor supported every soldier's daily bread. He remembered a particular governor known for fairness, ensuring taxes were collected honestly, without the corruption that sometimes strained relations between Rome and its provinces. Fair governance, Marcus believed, mattered as much to lasting peace as any legion's strength, since resentment bred by unfair taxation often planted seeds of future rebellion. The lamp in the administrative building finally dimmed, its work for the night complete, joining the quiet rhythm of a fort settling into morning routine. Marcus appreciated, more now than in his younger years, how many quiet hands worked steadily to hold the empire together beyond the reach of any sword. His own hands, calloused from 30 years of service, had touched swords, shovels, and ledgers alike, each equally a part of his long, faithful duty. Part 26. Dice and Rest. A soft laugh echoed briefly from the barracks below, quickly quieting again, reminding Marcus of the simple games soldiers played during quiet hours of rest. Dice, carved from bone, were common throughout the legion, small games of chance filling idle evenings between duties, marches, and the steady rhythm of training. Marcus remembered playing often with Gaius and Boduognatus, small wagers of coin or extra rations passing lightly between friends who trusted one another completely. Board games, too, were popular. Simple grids scratched into stone or wood, pieces moved carefully during long, quiet evenings beside a warm, steady fire. These small games mattered more than they seemed, Marcus thought, offering laughter and lightness amid the discipline and danger that filled so much of army life. He remembered storytelling evenings as well, older soldiers sharing tales of past campaigns, some true, some gently exaggerated, all welcomed equally around a shared fire. Music appeared occasionally too, a soldier with a simple pipe or lyre, playing quiet, familiar tunes that carried memories of home across the whole gathered group. Marcus himself had never been musical, though he enjoyed listening, resting his tired body while familiar melodies eased the day's accumulated tension gently away. Physical training filled other rest periods, wrestling matches, foot races, and mock combat drills keeping soldiers sharp even during calmer stretches of garrison life. He remembered friendly rivalries between units, good-natured competition that built pride without the bitterness that might otherwise weaken trust between neighboring companies. These small comforts, dice, songs, wrestling, and shared stories, held a legion together as surely as any drill or discipline ever could alone. Marcus understood, looking back now, that armies were not made only of weapons and marching, but of these small human moments, quiet and easily overlooked. He smiled faintly, remembering a particular evening when Gaius lost badly at dice, laughing louder than anyone, unbothered by the friendly, teasing insults that followed. Such memories, small and warm, had carried Marcus through harder nights than this one, reminders that even difficult service held room for simple, honest joy. The barracks below fell quiet again. soldiers likely settling toward sleep before their own duties began, leaving Marcus once more alone with his memories. Part 27. The Fear Before Battle. A stillness settled briefly over the tower, quiet and heavy, reminding Marcus of the particular silence that always came just before a battle began. Fear before combat was universal, Marcus had learned, felt by every soldier regardless of experience, rank, or the number of battles already survived. He remembered his own fear most sharply before his first true battle in Germania, hands trembling slightly despite months of careful, disciplined training beforehand. Gaius had told him then that the fear never fully disappeared, but a soldier learned slowly to carry it without letting it control his actions. Marcus remembered the strange calm that sometimes followed that fear, a steady focus settling in just as the first horn sounded across the battlefield. Training mattered greatly in these moments, since disciplined movements, practiced thousands of times, could continue even when a soldier's mind grew tight with fear. He remembered locking shields automatically during his first real skirmish, his body remembering the formation before his frightened mind had fully caught up. Comrades mattered just as much as training, the soldier beside him equally afraid, yet equally determined, each drawing quiet courage from the other's steady presence. Marcus had seen brave men falter and ordinary men rise unexpectedly, courage proving far less predictable than any officer's confident speech beforehand might suggest. He remembered comforting a frightened young recruit once, using nearly the same words Gaius had once given him, passed forward like a quiet inheritance. Fear, Marcus had come to believe, was not the opposite of courage, but its constant companion, present in every soldier who marched forward anyway. He thought of tomorrow's young soldiers, standing their own future watches, facing their own private fears, much as he once had so many years ago. Perhaps he thought that quiet, shared fear was itself a kind of bond, connecting every soldier across centuries, standing watch against the same old darkness. The stillness passed gently, replaced again by ordinary morning sounds, and Marcus breathed slowly, grateful that no battle horn would sound on this final morning. Part 28. Hostages and Treaties. A pair of riders passed slowly along the frontier road below, escorting a smaller figure between them, calm and unhurried in the soft morning light. The sight reminded Marcus of the quiet diplomacy that often shaped the frontier as much as any battle, treaties, hostages, and careful, patient negotiation. Rome frequently secured peace with neighboring tribes through formal agreements, sometimes sealed by the exchange of hostages, usually young sons of local chieftains. These hostages were not treated harshly. Instead, many were educated in Rome itself, learning Latin, Roman customs, and sometimes even military training alongside citizen youths. Marcus remembered meeting one such young man, a Germanic chieftain's son, calm and thoughtful, comfortable equally in his homeland's customs and in Roman society. Years later, some of these young men returned home as respected leaders, friendly toward Rome, having grown up understanding both worlds rather than fearing one. This quiet strategy often secured longer peace than any battle could, weaving personal relationships gently between Rome and the tribes along its wide frontier. Marcus had witnessed treaty negotiations firsthand once, tribal elders and Roman officials speaking carefully through translators, exchanging gifts alongside carefully worded promises. He remembered the patience required in these meetings, far different from the quick decisiveness of battle, built instead on careful listening and mutual respect. Client kingdoms, too, played their part, local rulers governing semi-independently while remaining loyal to Rome, providing soldiers and stability along contested borders. Marcus had guarded such a client king's territory briefly, impressed by how effectively local rule, supported quietly by Rome, maintained order without constant military presence. These arrangements were not always perfect, and tensions occasionally flared into open conflict, yet more often than not, patient diplomacy held the frontier steady. He thought of the shape he had seen earlier in the fog, calm and unmoving, and wondered if even that quiet, uncertain presence understood this same patience. Perhaps peace, Marcus considered, was built less through the sword he carried, and more through these quiet threads of trust, woven slowly across many years. The riders below disappeared toward the fort's gate, their small hostage turned guest safe between them. One more quiet thread added to the empire's wide, patient peace. Part 29. The Legion's Soul. A soft chant rose briefly from a small group of soldiers gathered near the standards, a quiet morning prayer offered before the day's duties began. Marcus listened, familiar with the words, having spoken them himself countless times across 30 years of steady, faithful service beneath the same watchful standards. Each legion held its standards sacred, not merely as symbols, but as objects believed to carry the very spirit, the genius of the unit itself. A small shrine within every fort housed these standards, guarded constantly, honored with regular offerings, and treated with a reverence close to religious devotion. Marcus remembered the ceremony marking his own enlistment, swearing loyalty not only to the emperor, but symbolically to the eagle that would lead him forward. Over the years, that eagle had become, quietly, something like a companion, present at every battle, every march, every difficult and triumphant moment of his service. He remembered the fierce protectiveness soldiers felt toward their standards, willing to risk everything rather than allow the sacred eagle to fall into enemy hands. Losing a standard was considered a deep disgrace, sometimes leading to a legion's number being retired entirely, its history quietly folded away in shame. Marcus had never experienced such a loss himself, and he felt, quietly, grateful for that fact as he neared the end of his long service. The Legion's spirit, he had come to believe, lived not only in its standards, but in the soldiers themselves, carried forward through shared memory and duty. Every veteran who retired carried a small piece of that spirit with him, scattered slowly across the empire, into farms, families, and future generations. Marcus wondered what small piece of that spirit he himself would carry forward, quiet and steady, into the new chapter awaiting him beyond the frontier. The soldiers below finished their morning prayer, turning calmly toward their daily duties, the standards catching the first full light of the rising sun. Marcus watched them a moment longer, feeling, quietly, that same steady spirit settle gently within his own tired chest, warm and lasting, ready to be carried home. Part 30. The Long Roads. Below the tower, the frontier road stretched outward into the mist, straight and solid, built long before Marcus had ever set foot upon it. Roman roads were engineering marvels, built in careful layers, gravel and stone packed tightly beneath a smooth, slightly curved surface designed to drain rainwater quickly. Marcus remembered watching engineers survey new routes, using simple but precise tools, ensuring roads ran as straight as the surrounding land allowed. These roads connected the empire in ways few people fully appreciated, moving soldiers, merchants, messages, and grain across distances that once took weeks to cross. He remembered marching along roads laid a century earlier, still solid beneath thousands of boots, a quiet testament to careful, patient Roman craftsmanship. Milestones marked distances along every major road, small stone markers giving travelers and soldiers a steady sense of progress across long, uncertain journeys. Marcus had counted milestones absent-mindedly during long marches, each one a small, quiet victory, marking distance covered and distance still remaining ahead. Bridges, too, were built to endure, stone arches spanning rivers that had once required dangerous fords, saving countless soldiers from the risks of deep water crossings. He remembered crossing one such bridge in Dacia during a spring flood, grateful for solid Roman stone beneath him rather than the river's dangerous, swollen current. Rest stations, called mansions, appeared at regular intervals, offering travelers food, shelter, and fresh horses, much like the beacon towers along the fighting frontier. Marcus had rested at many such stations over the years, brief comforts along otherwise difficult journeys, small reminders of the empire's careful, steady planning. These roads would likely outlast the empire itself, he sometimes thought, solid stone remaining long after soldiers, emperors, and even Rome's memory eventually faded. Tonight, the frontier road below carried no traffic yet, quiet and waiting, much like Marcus himself, standing patiently at the edge of his own long journey's end. Tomorrow, that same road would carry him homeward, one more traveler among countless others who had walked this same steady path before him. Part 31. Prisoners and Spoils. A small line of figures moved slowly along a side path below, guarded loosely by two soldiers, calm and unhurried in the quiet morning light. The sight reminded Marcus of the harder truths of army life, truths rarely spoken of warmly, concerning prisoners taken during years of frontier campaigning. War brought captives, and captives often became slaves, sold at camp markets that followed every legion, a grim but ordinary part of ancient military life. Marcus had witnessed this many times, uncomfortable with it even in his youth, though it remained simply the accepted custom of the world he served. Some captives were ransomed back to their people, especially those of higher rank, their families paying carefully negotiated sums for safe, quiet return. Others were absorbed slowly into Roman society, laboring on farms, in households, or occasionally earning freedom after years of loyal, patient service. Marcus remembered a freed craftsman, once captured in Dacia, who later worked willingly within the very fort where he had first arrived as a prisoner. Such stories offered Marcus a strange, quiet comfort, proof that even difficult beginnings could sometimes soften slowly into something resembling an ordinary, settled life. Spoils of war extended beyond captives. Gold, weapons, and livestock also gathered and distributed carefully among soldiers according to rank and conduct in battle. Marcus had received a small share himself after Dacia, modest coin that he sent home to Livia, a small comfort during his long absence. He understood that this system, however uncomfortable in places, had shaped the world he lived within, and he had long since made his peace with it. Not every soldier felt the same, and Marcus remembered quiet conversations, late at night, where men wrestled honestly with the harder edges of their service. Gaius once told him that a soldier's duty was to follow orders honorably, while still remaining, quietly, a man capable of decent and fair judgment. Marcus had tried across 30 years to hold both of these truths together, loyal to Rome, yet never fully losing his own private conscience. The small line of figures below disappeared toward the fort's supply buildings, and Marcus turned his eyes onward, carrying this old, familiar weight a while longer. Part 32. The watch continues. The sky had brightened further now, soft gold spreading steadily across the eastern hills, though a thin ribbon of fog still clung low along the valley floor. Marcus glanced once more at the young soldier beside him, quiet and attentive, still faithfully watching the same misty ground they had guarded together all night. He thought of all the watches he had stood before this one, thousands of quiet hours spread across 3 decades, each one small, each one necessary. No single watch had ever felt especially remarkable while he stood it, yet together, they had formed the entire steady shape of his long service. Marcus considered how strange that was, a life built not from a few great moments, but from thousands of small, patient, unremarkable hours like this one. He remembered young recruits sometimes complaining that watch duty felt dull, wishing instead for glory, for battle, for something worthy of a soldier's proud story. Marcus understood that feeling well, having felt it himself once, before learning that quiet vigilance was its own kind of courage, steady rather than sudden. A frontier held not through constant battle, but through patient, unglamorous watching, night after night, season after season, year after steady year. He thought of the beacon fires, the couriers, the road below, all part of the same quiet discipline that had kept this frontier calm for so long. Tonight's watch would end soon, quietly, without incident, much like most of the watches Marcus had stood throughout his long and faithful career. Yet this one felt different, heavier somehow, carrying the full weight of everything that had come before it, gathered gently into these final few hours. Marcus breathed slowly, steady and calm, feeling something settle within him, a quiet readiness for whatever this last morning might still bring his way. The young soldier beside him shifted slightly, glancing toward the brightening sky, sensing perhaps that the long night was finally, gently drawing to its close. Marcus placed a steady hand briefly on the young man's shoulder. A small, wordless gesture passed quietly between an old soldier and a new one. Then he turned his eyes back toward the fog-covered ground below, patient and calm, ready to meet whatever remained of this last, quiet watch. Part 33. The Road to Centurion. A steady voice below gave quiet morning orders, calm and certain, reminding Marcus of the long, patient path that led a soldier toward real command. Most legionaries served their entire careers as common soldiers, yet a smaller number, through steadiness and skill, eventually rose to become centurions themselves. Marcus had been offered that path twice, and twice he had considered it carefully, weighing the heavier burden of command against the life he already knew. A centurion led roughly 80 men, responsible not only for their training and discipline, but for their well-being, their morale, and their lives in battle. He remembered watching Gaius manage this weight for years, calm under pressure, patient with young recruits, firm without ever tipping into needless cruelty. Centurions were chosen for proven courage, sound judgment, and the ability to remain steady when younger soldiers around them began to waver with fear. Marcus recalled a difficult skirmish in Dacia where Gaius had held the line calmly, his voice never rising, his orders clear even amid great danger. That steadiness, Marcus came to understand, mattered more than any particular skill with a sword, since panic spread quickly, while calm spread just as surely. He remembered finally deciding against promotion after his second offer, feeling his own strength lay more in steady service than in the weight of command. Gaius had respected that choice completely, telling him once that Rome needed both kinds of soldiers, those who led, and those who steadied the ranks beside them. Centurions carried a distinctive vine staff, called the vitus, both a symbol of authority and, when necessary, a tool of immediate discipline in the field. Marcus had felt that staffs weighed only rarely across his years, mostly for minor lapses, always administered fairly, without anger, by officers he respected. Promotion within the Centurion carried its own careful ladder, from the ordinary centurions up toward the senior centurion of the entire legion, the primus pilus. Few men ever reached that highest rank, and Marcus had known only one in his lifetime, a quiet, steady man nearing the very end of his own service. Watching the officers below now, Marcus felt no regret for the path he had chosen. content instead with the steady, faithful shape his service had taken. Part 34. The Funeral Fire. A single dark trail of smoke rose briefly from beyond the fort's walls, thin and quiet, before dispersing gently into the lightening morning sky. The sight reminded Marcus softly of the funeral rites soldiers observed for fallen comrades, rituals carried out carefully no matter how difficult the circumstances. Every legionary paid a small sum regularly into a burial fund, ensuring that even a soldier who died far from home received proper, respectful rites. Marcus remembered his first such funeral in Germania, a young soldier lost to fever rather than battle, mourned quietly by the entire assembled contubernium. The body was washed, wrapped carefully, and placed upon a modest pyre, while comrades spoke simple words remembering the soldier's courage and steady character. A coin was placed beneath the tongue, an old custom meant to pay passage across the river separating the living from the world of the dead. Marcus had performed this small rite many times over the years, his hands growing steadier with each loss, though the weight never fully disappeared. He remembered Gaius speaking once at such a funeral, calm and measured, reminding the gathered soldiers that grief and duty could exist together without conflict. Ashes were often sent home when possible, carried carefully along the same roads that once carried letters, returning a soldier finally to family and rest. When return was not possible, small memorial stones were raised near the fort itself, simple markers bearing a name, an age, and years of service. Marcus had walked past such stones countless times, pausing occasionally to read a name, remembering faces that had once stood watches beside his own. He thought now of the men he had personally lost across 30 years, a quiet list carried gently in memory, never spoken aloud, yet never forgotten. Death was never treated lightly within the Legion, despite the danger surrounding every campaign, and this careful, steady ritual gave soldiers a way to carry loss. Marcus understood that his own name would likely appear on no such stone now, having survived long enough to see his discharge arrive peacefully. He felt quietly a mixture of relief and grief for that fact, grateful for his own survival, yet mindful of those who had not been so fortunate. The last thin trail of smoke faded fully into the morning air, and Marcus offered a silent, private word for every comrade he had ever lost. Part 35. The Desert Wind. A dry gust of wind passed briefly through the tower, unusual against the damp northern fog, carrying with it a distant, half-forgotten memory of heat. Years before this posting, Marcus had spent a single difficult season on the Empire's eastern frontier, guarding supply lines during tensions along the Parthian border. The desert there felt like another world entirely, dry and endless, heat pressing down during the day, cold settling sharply once the sun finally set. Marcus remembered marching across open ground with almost no shade, water rationed carefully, every soldier learning quickly to conserve strength during the harsh midday hours. The Parthians fought differently than any enemy he had faced before, skilled horsemen and mounted archers, striking swiftly before retreating across open desert terrain. He remembered the famous tactic soldiers called the Parthian shot, riders firing arrows backward while retreating at full gallop, a skill that took years to master. Roman formations adapted carefully against this style of warfare, forming tighter lines, protecting flanks, and relying heavily on disciplined patience rather than open pursuit. Marcus recalled the strange quiet of desert nights, stars unusually bright and close, the silence broken only occasionally by a distant, echoing call. Water became the truest currency of that campaign, wells and cisterns guarded as carefully as any gold, since thirst proved more dangerous than any enemy blade. He remembered local guides who understood the land deeply, leading columns safely between water sources, their knowledge more valuable than any map drawn in Rome. Trade caravans passed through these regions as well, carrying silk, spices, and goods from lands far beyond even Rome's furthest borders, exotic and unfamiliar. Marcus had tasted foods there unlike anything in Italy, dates impossibly sweet, spiced meats unfamiliar to his tongue, gifts from merchants grateful for safe passage. That eastern posting lasted only a single difficult season before Marcus returned north again, yet its memory remained vivid, distinct from every other campaign. He remembered feeling oddly, a kind of respect for that harsh, beautiful landscape, so different from the green fields and gray fog of his more familiar postings. The dry wind faded as quickly as it had come, replaced again by familiar northern dampness, and the desert memory settled quietly back into the past. Part 36. The Emperor Among Soldiers. Marcus remembered the day clearly, brighter somehow than most memories from those difficult mountain campaigns, when Emperor Trajan had walked directly among the common ranks. It happened during a pause in the Dacian campaign, supplies being distributed, when word spread quickly that the emperor himself was moving through the camp. Marcus had expected distance, formality, the kind of careful ceremony surrounding most powerful men. Yet Trajan moved simply, speaking easily with ordinary soldiers nearby. He remembered the emperor stopping near his own supply line, asking plainly about rations, about morale, about whether the mountain cold was being managed well enough. Marcus had answered honestly, surprised at his own steady voice, while Trajan listened attentively, nodding, asking a simple follow-up question about boot conditions in the cold. It struck Marcus deeply that the most powerful man in the world seemed genuinely interested in something as small as whether a soldier's feet stayed dry. Trajan was known throughout the army for this quality, having served as a soldier himself before becoming emperor, understanding army life from lived experience rather than distant reports. Marcus remembered older veterans speaking with real affection about Trajan, contrasting him favorably with more distant rulers who rarely left the comfort of Rome itself. This closeness between emperor and army built a particular kind of loyalty, one earned through shared hardship rather than demanded through simple title or decree. Marcus recalled the emperor's calm manner even amid clear danger, visiting forward positions personally, sharing risk rather than directing safely from behind the lines. That day left Marcus with a lasting respect, not blind loyalty, but genuine trust earned through small, human moments rather than grand, distant speeches. He thought now, standing on this quiet frontier tower, that Trajan's reign represented something rare, power held firmly, yet carried with real, visible humility. Word had reached the fort recently that the emperor's health had grown uncertain during his travels in the east, a piece of news that saddened soldiers quietly. Marcus hoped, standing now in the brightening morning light, that whatever news eventually came, the empire's steady course would continue much as it always had. Whatever happened next in Rome's distant halls of power, Marcus felt grateful simply to have once stood near a ruler who had asked about his boots. Part 37. The Aqueduct. Somewhere below, water moved steadily through a stone channel, a soft, constant sound that reminded Marcus of engineering marvels he had seen across the empire. Every fort of size relied on careful water systems, channels and pipes bringing fresh water from distant springs directly into barracks, baths, and kitchens. Marcus remembered watching engineers build a small aqueduct years earlier, using careful measurements to maintain a gentle, steady slope across many miles of terrain. Even a small error in that slope could stop the water entirely, so engineers checked their work repeatedly, patient and precise, before any construction began. He remembered the larger aqueducts feeding cities like Rome itself, towering arches carrying water across valleys, an engineering feat that still amazed him to recall. These structures required constant maintenance, teams of workers inspecting channels regularly, clearing debris, and repairing small cracks before they widened into larger problems. Marcus had briefly assisted with such maintenance during a posting near a provincial city, work far removed from soldiering, yet strangely satisfying in its own right. He remembered the simple pleasure of clean, steady water flowing into a fort's bathhouse, a comfort easy to take for granted until a system failed. Engineers used simple tools, the chorobates and the dioptra, to measure levels and angles with a precision that still impressed Marcus even now. He remembered a bridge collapse he witnessed once, caused by a flood rather than poor construction, and the swift, organized effort to repair it within weeks. Roman engineering, Marcus had come to believe, reflected the same patient discipline found throughout the legion itself, careful planning followed by steady, reliable execution. Water, roads, and walls together formed the quiet skeleton of the empire, less celebrated than any battle, yet arguably more essential to daily survival. Marcus thought of the small stream feeding his own fort's supply, steady and unremarkable, much like the many quiet systems that had supported his entire career. He had never fully appreciated in his younger years how much unseen effort kept a soldier fed, clean, and healthy across even the harshest campaigns. Now, nearing the end of his service, Marcus felt a quiet gratitude for all of it: the water, the roads, the bread, the walls, and everything unseen. Part 38. The Discharge Ceremony. Marcus thought ahead now, briefly, to the formal ceremony awaiting him later this same day, the moment his 30 years of service would be properly recognized. Honorable discharge, called anastamitio, was granted to soldiers completing their full term of service without serious disgrace, a formal and respected transition. He would receive a diploma, a small bronze tablet confirming his service, his benefits, and in some cases, citizenship rights extended to his family as well. Marcus remembered witnessing many such ceremonies over the years, older comrades standing proudly before the assembled legion, receiving recognition for decades of faithful duty. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, a public reading of service records, a formal handshake from the commanding officer, and a final release from military obligation. He remembered feeling, as a young soldier, a quiet awe watching veterans receive this honor, wondering distantly if he himself would ever stand in their place. Now that day had finally arrived, and Marcus felt a strange mixture of pride and uncertainty, ready for rest, yet unsure of life beyond the legion. He thought of the small farm awaiting him, the quiet years ahead with Livia, a life measured in seasons rather than watches, marches, and careful drills. Marcus remembered older veterans adjusting slowly to civilian life, some finding peace quickly, others missing the structure and brotherhood the Legion had provided for so long. He hoped, quietly, to find his own peace more quickly, though he understood that 30 years of discipline could not simply be set aside in a single day. The bronze diploma would join Livia's small wooden token beneath his belongings, two quiet symbols marking the two halves of his long, steady life. Marcus felt ready as any man could be, to close one chapter fully while stepping calmly into whatever came next, unhurried and at peace. He glanced once more at the brightening sky, thinking of the ceremony ahead, and of the quiet, ordinary years he hoped would follow it gently afterward. Soon enough, he thought, his name would be read aloud one final time as a serving soldier, before becoming, permanently, simply a veteran of Rome. That thought settled calmly within him, steady and warm, much like the morning light now spreading fully across the frontier he had guarded for so long. Part 39. The Second Glimpse. Some hours earlier, long before the sky had begun to soften toward morning, Marcus had seen the shape in the fog for the very first time. It had appeared briefly near the tree line beyond the ditch, still and pale, gone again almost before his tired eyes could fully register its presence. He had said nothing to the young guard beside him, telling himself calmly that fatigue alone could easily explain such a small, uncertain trick of the fog. 30 years of watches had taught him that the night often played gentle games with tired eyes, shadows shifting, shapes forming briefly from nothing at all. Still, something about that first glimpse had lingered, quiet and persistent, refusing to fully settle into the ordinary explanations he offered himself. An hour later it had appeared again, closer this time, near the old dead oak that marked the boundary of the fort's cleared ground. Marcus remembered gripping his spear slightly tighter, though the shape made no movement toward him, no sound, simply standing, patient, within the drifting gray mist. He had almost woken the young guard fully to ask if he saw it too, then hesitated, uncertain whether to trust his own eyes over a young man's rest. Each time the shape appeared, it seemed to coincide with a memory rising unbidden within him, as though the fog itself were somehow tied to his own past. Marcus was not a superstitious man, not truly, though 30 years near so many different gods had taught him a certain quiet humility about the unknown. He thought of Mithras, of the household Lares, of the strange old beliefs held gently by soldiers from a dozen different provinces across the empire. Perhaps, he thought, the fog itself was simply old, older than the fort, older than Rome, patient enough to hold shapes that ordinary daylight would never allow. He did not feel afraid exactly, standing there in the deepening night, only a quiet, growing curiosity about what or who continued watching him so patiently. The shape had vanished again after that second glimpse, leaving Marcus alone once more with the torch, the fog, and the slow, unwinding thread of memory. He resolved, quietly, to say nothing further about it until morning, trusting that whatever waited in the mist would reveal its purpose in its own good time. Part 40. The Weight of Silence. For a long while after the second glimpse, Marcus stood especially still, listening carefully to a silence that felt, somehow, different from any he had known before. He wondered briefly whether age itself might be playing tricks on him, the mind of an old soldier finally beginning to blur memory with the present moment. Yet his hands remained steady, his thoughts remained clear, and he felt none of the confusion he had once witnessed in older veterans nearing the ends of their lives. Marcus considered instead that perhaps this night was simply different by its very nature, the last watch carrying a weight that no ordinary night could hold. He thought of every soldier he had known who had once described a strange calm before a significant change, a battle, a promotion, or a final departure. Perhaps the mind, he considered, prepared itself quietly for great transitions, gathering the past gently together before allowing a man to step fully into what came next. He remembered Gaius once speaking of a similar feeling before his own retirement years earlier, describing it only as a strange, settled quietness, hard to fully explain. Marcus had not understood it then, young and still eager for further campaigns, yet he understood it completely now, standing at the very edge of his own service. The silence around him did not feel empty exactly, but full, heavy with everything he had lived, thick with memory the way fog itself grew thick with moisture. He breathed slowly, letting that fullness settle rather than resisting it, understanding quietly that resistance would only make the final hours harder to carry. Somewhere distant, a single bird began to call, tentative and soft, testing the last edges of darkness before the full arrival of morning light. Marcus welcomed the sound, grateful for anything ordinary amid a night that had otherwise felt increasingly, strangely significant beyond any watch he had stood before. He thought again of the shape in the fog, patient and still, and wondered quietly whether it too was simply waiting for the right, ordinary moment to arrive. Whatever it was, ghost, memory, or simple trick of tired eyes, Marcus felt strangely unafraid, ready to meet it fully when it finally chose to approach. The silence held a while longer, patient and calm, before the distant bird called again, a little braver this time, welcoming the coming of the dawn. Part 41. The River Crossing. A faint sound of moving water drifted up from a stream beyond the fort, reminding Marcus of a difficult river crossing during his years in Dacia. The army had reached a wide, swollen river with no bridge nearby, the current too strong and too cold for soldiers to simply wade across safely. Engineers set to work immediately, felling trees and lashing them together into a pontoon bridge, a temporary but sturdy path across the dangerous water. Marcus remembered volunteering to help anchor the first section, wading carefully into water so cold it stole the breath from his chest almost instantly. Ropes were secured to trees on the near bank, while smaller boats ferried materials steadily toward the far side, the entire effort coordinated with careful, practiced calm. He remembered the engineers' quiet confidence throughout the work, men who had built such crossings many times before, trusting their own careful measurements completely. By evening, a narrow but solid bridge stretched fully across the river, swaying gently, yet strong enough to carry soldiers, supplies, and even horses steadily across. Marcus remembered crossing that same bridge himself the following morning, the wood creaking softly beneath his boots, the cold river rushing steadily below. Halfway across, he had paused briefly, looking down at the powerful current, feeling small against a force of nature that no shield or sword could resist. Yet the bridge held, steady and true, a testament to the same careful discipline that shaped every part of Roman military life, patient and well-practiced. He remembered the relief on the far bank, soldiers warming themselves briefly by fires, while engineers began already dismantling the bridge for reuse further along the campaign. Nothing was wasted in that army, Marcus recalled. Ropes coiled carefully, timber salvaged wherever possible, every resource treated with quiet, practical respect. That crossing had taught him something lasting about courage, that it often looked less like boldness and more like trusting careful preparation completely under pressure. He thought now of the frontier road below his tower, solid and permanent, built by the same patient hands that had once thrown a bridge across raging water. The sound of the stream faded gently, and Marcus carried that old memory of cold water and steady ropes a while longer into the brightening morning. Part 42. An old veteran's counsel. Marcus remembered a conversation from many years earlier, shared quietly with an older veteran named Rufus, a man then facing the very discharge Marcus faced tonight. Rufus had served nearly 40 years, longer even than most, and Marcus had asked him plainly, one evening, what life beyond the Legion truly felt like. The old man had smiled slowly, telling Marcus that the hardest part was not missing the marching, but missing the certainty that army life provided daily. Every hour of a soldier's day was decided for him. Rufus explained, duties assigned, meals scheduled, orders given, leaving little room for uncertain, open choice. Civilian life, by contrast, offered nothing but choice, quiet and sometimes overwhelming, especially for a man who had spent decades simply following clear commands. Marcus remembered feeling puzzled by this at the time, young enough still to crave exactly that kind of freedom Rufus seemed to describe so cautiously. Now, standing near his own discharge, Marcus finally understood the old man's words fully, feeling a quiet uncertainty beneath his relief at finally going home. Rufus had offered him simple advice that evening, telling him to build new routines quickly, small daily tasks that could replace the structure the Legion once provided. Tend a garden, Rufus had said. Walk the same path each morning. Visit neighbors regularly. Small habits, steady and repeated, could hold a life together just as well as any drill. Marcus remembered thinking, at the time, that such advice sounded almost too simple, yet the memory of it had stayed with him across many years since. He resolved now to follow it seriously, planning already, quietly, small routines for the farm awaiting him, tasks that might replace the rhythm of camp life. He would rise early, as he always had, tend his small fields, walk the boundary of his land much as he had once walked frontier roads. Perhaps, he thought, retirement was not truly an ending, but simply a change in the shape of discipline, smaller now, softer, yet no less steady. He wondered whether Rufus still lived, wondering if he might visit the old man someday soon, sharing gratitude for advice that had waited patiently, unused for 30 years. The thought comforted him deeply, a quiet plan already forming for the life ahead, built from the same patient discipline that had carried him through every difficult year of service. Part 43. The Language of Stone. Marcus glanced once more toward the frontier road below, thinking suddenly of all the different names this same land had carried across his many years of service. Local tribes called these hills by names Marcus had never learned to pronounce correctly, ancient words tied to rivers, forests, and features long predating Roman arrival. Roman maps, by contrast, used simpler names, often borrowed clumsily from local words, or invented fresh entirely by surveying officers passing briefly through the region. Marcus remembered learning slowly that place names themselves told quiet stories, layers of different peoples settling briefly upon the same enduring, patient ground. He had crossed rivers with 3 or 4 different names, depending on which tribe, which map, or which soldier happened to be speaking at the time. This blending of language fascinated him quietly, even as a common soldier untrained in scholarship, simply through years of listening carefully to the men around him. He remembered a local guide once explaining that a nearby hill's name meant something like the watching place, fitting neatly with its use as a frontier lookout. Marcus wondered if future generations, centuries from now, would still use that same old name or invent something new entirely, unaware of the soldiers who once stood there. Stone itself seemed to hold this same quiet layering, old foundations sometimes discovered beneath newer Roman construction, evidence of peoples who had lived here long before any legion arrived. He remembered finding worn carvings once, faint symbols predating even the oldest local legends, patient reminders that history stretched back far beyond Rome's own considerable reach. This layering comforted Marcus somehow, understanding that his own service, however significant it felt personally, was simply one more layer added atop many older ones before it. Someday, he thought, Roman roads themselves might lie buried beneath newer paths, remembered only faintly, much like the older names and carvings he had encountered himself. That thought did not sadden him. Instead, it offered a strange, steady comfort, understanding his own life as one small, patient layer within something vast and enduring. He looked out once more across the misty frontier, feeling connected suddenly to every soldier, farmer, and traveler who had ever stood upon this same quiet ground. The road below remained silent and waiting, patient as stone itself, ready to carry countless more travelers long after Marcus himself had finally gone home. Part 44. The Cook Fire. A faint smell of wood smoke and warm bread drifted up from the fort's kitchens, gentle and familiar, easing quietly into the cool morning air around the tower. Marcus remembered countless evenings gathered around a similar fire, his contubernium of 8 men sharing the simple, steady work of preparing their evening meal together. Each group of soldiers carried a small hand mill, grinding grain fresh when time allowed, the low, steady sound of familiar comfort after a long day's march. One soldier usually tended the fire, another the dough, while others prepared whatever additional food the day's foraging or rations had managed to provide. Marcus remembered a soldier named Felix who somehow always coaxed remarkable flavor from the simplest ingredients: a little wild garlic, a pinch of salt, patient care. Bread baked slowly in small clay ovens or simply on flat stones near the fire, the smell alone often enough to draw tired men gratefully toward the flames. He remembered the quiet ritual of these meals, little conversation at first, simply the comfort of warmth and food after hours of marching or standing watch. Slowly, as bellies filled, conversation would return, softly at first. Stories, complaints, gentle jokes passed easily between men who trusted one another completely. Wine, heavily watered, was shared carefully among the group, more for flavor and calm than for any real effect, a small, steady comfort each evening. Marcus remembered teaching a young recruit once how to properly tend a cook fire. Patient instruction passed the same way Gaius had once taught him. These small, ordinary meals, he had come to believe, held the legion together as surely as any battle, quiet moments of shared warmth repeated night after night. He remembered particularly cold nights in Britannia, when the cook fire felt like the only warmth in the entire world. 8 men huddled gratefully close together. Even now, decades later, the smell of wood smoke and baking bread could carry him instantly back to those quiet evenings, warm and steady, among trusted friends. He breathed in slowly now, letting the familiar scent settle over him one final time, grateful for every simple meal shared across 30 faithful years. Soon, he thought, he would share meals again with Livia, quieter perhaps, without the noise of 8 tired soldiers, yet warm in their own new and gentle way. Part 45. The Letter Never Sent. Tucked carefully within his pack, folded many times until the creases had softened with age, Marcus carried a letter he had written but never sent. It was addressed to his daughter, Emilia, born the same year he had first marched into Dacia, a child he had seen only a handful of times. He had written the letter after receiving news of her wedding, a celebration he could not attend, held far away while he still owed years of service. In it, he had tried to explain the reasons for his long absence, the sacramentum, the discipline, the quiet duty that had shaped his entire adult life. Yet each time he reread it, the words felt insufficient, unable to fully capture 30 years of distance, longing and quiet, steady love carried from far away. Marcus remembered writing new drafts over several evenings, each one slightly different, none of them ever feeling quite ready to finally send toward home. Eventually, he had simply kept it, folded carefully, telling himself he would deliver it in person once his service finally ended and he returned to Rome. He touched the letter now briefly, through the fabric of his pack, feeling its familiar shape, worn soft from years of careful, quiet handling. He wondered what Emilia looked like now, grown fully into a woman he barely knew, perhaps with children of her own he had never met. Livia's letters had described her gently over the years, small details gathered patiently. Yet nothing could fully replace the ordinary missed moments of an actual shared life. Marcus felt a familiar ache settle in his chest, quieter now than in his younger years, softened by time, yet never fully disappearing completely. He resolved, standing there in the fading dark, to finally deliver the letter himself, placing it directly into her hands rather than trusting it to any courier. Perhaps, he thought, some words were meant to travel slowly, carried not by roads and relay stations, but by patience, distance, and a father's steady love. He pictured the moment already, quiet and uncertain, unfolding the worn letter before her, finally closing a distance that had lasted almost her entire life. The thought filled him with something between nervousness and hope, a feeling he had rarely known on any battlefield, yet one he welcomed fully all the same. Part 46. The names on the wall. Near the base of the tower, carved quietly into old timber, Marcus knew there were names, dozens of them, left by soldiers who had stood this same watch before him. He had added his own name there once, years earlier, during his first posting to this particular fort, a small, private mark left among so many others. Soldiers often carved names, dates, or small symbols into fort timbers, quiet signatures left behind, unofficial yet lasting records of ordinary men who had served here. Marcus remembered reading names left decades before his own arrival, wondering idly about the lives behind each simple carved letter, long since scattered across the empire. Some names were accompanied by small marks, a legion's number, a hometown's initial, small details meant only for the soldier who had carved them, not for history. He remembered finding one carving that simply read, "I was here, and I was afraid, and I stayed anyway," words that had stayed with him for years afterward. Marcus never learned who had written it, yet he had thought of that soldier often, especially during his own most difficult nights standing watch on distant walls. Tonight, before dawn arrived fully, he intended to add one final mark beside his old name, a small acknowledgement of the 30 years since he first carved it. He thought carefully about what words might belong there, resisting anything grand or dramatic, wanting instead something simple, honest, and true to his quiet service. Perhaps he would write only his name again, and the years, nothing more needed to explain 3 decades of steady, faithful duty along Rome's wide frontier. He thought of the future soldiers who might someday read it, young men not yet born, standing watches on nights not yet arrived, curious about old names. Perhaps one of them, tired and uncertain during their own long night, might find some small comfort simply knowing another soldier had once stood exactly where they stood. Marcus reached toward his belt for the small knife he always carried, ready now to leave this final, quiet mark before the sun rose fully over the wall. It felt right somehow to close his service the same simple way he had once begun it, carving quietly, honestly into old and patient wood. The names around his own, he thought, formed their own kind of legion, invisible yet steady, stretching back through decades of ordinary, faithful frontier service. Part 47. The Wolf and the Legion. Far in the distance, so faint Marcus almost imagined it, the wolf called once more, softer now, as if bidding a quiet farewell to the fading night. The sound carried him back gently to the very beginning of Rome itself, to the old story every legionary learned early in his training and service. Romulus and Remus, twin brothers abandoned as infants, were said to have been nursed and protected by a she-wolf beside the river that would become Rome. Marcus remembered hearing this story first as a boy, long before he ever considered joining the Legion, a tale told warmly beside his own family's hearth. It struck him now, standing near the end of his service, how fitting it felt that a wolf's call had guided him gently through this final night. The wolf represented, for many soldiers, a kind of fierce protection, wild yet nurturing, dangerous to enemies yet gentle toward those it considered truly its own. Marcus had seen the symbol countless times, carved into standards, stamped onto coins, painted occasionally onto shields carried by proud, superstitious young recruits. He remembered Gaius once saying that every legionary carried a little of that same wolf within him, capable of fierce loyalty, and equally fierce protection. Loyalty to comrades, Marcus reflected, had always felt like the truest heart of his own service, stronger even than loyalty to distant emperors or abstract ideas of Rome. He thought of every contubernium he had shared a fire with, every centurion who had guided him, every young recruit he had quietly mentored across the years. Together, these bonds had formed something like a pack Marcus considered fierce and loyal, protecting one another through countless difficult nights just like this one. The wolf's distant call faded fully now, swallowed gently by the growing light of morning, leaving only silence and the soft rustle of wind through grass. Marcus felt, quietly, that the old story had somehow accompanied him faithfully through his entire career, present at the beginning of this long night, present again near its end. He wondered if new recruits still heard that same old story beside their own family hearths, carrying it forward the same way he once had, long ago. Perhaps Rome's true strength, he thought, lay less in her legions or her roads, and more in stories like this one, patient and old, still calling softly through the fog. Part 48, The Final Hour. The eastern sky had turned fully gold now, the last thin traces of fog lifting slowly from the valley floor, revealing green hills beneath a gentle morning light. Marcus felt his heart settle into something calm and steady, the accumulated weight of an entire night's memory finally easing quietly across his tired shoulders. He thought of Germania's dark forests, of Dacia's cold mountains, of Egypt's warm sands, of Britannia's steady rain, each place folding gently now into a single, complete story. He thought of Livia, of Emilia, of Gaius, of Rufus, of Felix, of every soldier and friend who had shaped his long and steady service. He thought of bread shared by firelight, of bridges built across dangerous rivers, of roads stretching endlessly toward distant, waiting horizons. Each memory settled quietly into place, like stones fitted carefully into a solid wall, forming together the complete, steady shape of an entire life. Marcus understood now, more clearly than ever before, why this final watch had felt so different from the thousands that came before it. It was not simply the last night of his service. It was the night his entire life had finally gathered itself together, quietly, to be remembered fully. He glanced once more toward the tree line beyond the ditch, toward the spot where the strange shape had appeared twice already during the long night. The fog there had thinned considerably now, revealing only ordinary grass and stone, empty and calm beneath the strengthening morning light. Marcus felt no disappointment at its absence. Instead, he felt a quiet readiness, sensing somehow that whatever waited in the mist would return one final time. He straightened slightly, adjusting the weight of his cloak, feeling strangely lighter despite 30 years now resting fully and completely upon his shoulders. The young guard beside him yawned quietly, glancing toward the brightening sky, sensing perhaps that their long-shared watch was finally, gently drawing toward its close. Marcus placed a steady hand once more on the young man's shoulder, A small gesture of quiet reassurance passed between an old soldier and a new one. Whatever remained of this final hour, Marcus felt ready to meet it fully, calm and steady, much like every other hour he had faithfully stood before it. Part 49. The Shield Wall. A memory rose quietly now, calm rather than frightening, of a single afternoon in Germania when Marcus's cohort had held a shield wall against a determined enemy charge. The tribe had emerged suddenly from the tree line, more numerous than expected, though Roman discipline held steady even as shouts rose across the clearing. Marcus remembered locking his shield tightly against the soldier beside him, forming a solid, unbroken line, the way countless drills had trained his body to do. The Centurion's voice rang out clearly above the noise, calm and measured, calling the formation to hold firm rather than break into disorganized, individual combat. Marcus felt the weight of the first impact travel through his shield and into his shoulder, steady rather than overwhelming, absorbed calmly by the entire formation together. Spears extended carefully between shields, striking forward in coordinated rhythm, each soldier trusting completely in the steady presence of the men beside him. He remembered the strange, focused calm that settled over him during that exchange, fear present but distant, discipline guiding his movements more than conscious thought. The enemy charge broke gradually against the steady formation, unable to find any gap wide enough to exploit, retreating finally back toward the tree line. Marcus remembered the silence afterward, heavy and complete, broken only by heavy breathing and the quiet, careful checking of comrades for wounds. No soldier in his immediate line had fallen that day, a small mercy Marcus had never taken for granted, understanding clearly how differently it might have ended. The Centurion praised the formation's discipline afterward, reminding the assembled soldiers that their shields, held together, had proven stronger than any individual courage alone. Marcus carried that lesson forward through every campaign since, understanding deeply that a legion's true strength lived not in single soldiers, but in trust between them. He thought now of the shield resting nearby against the tower wall, worn and familiar, having carried him safely through that afternoon and so many others like it. Tomorrow, he would set it down finally, grateful for its steady service, grateful equally for every soldier who had ever stood locked beside him within its shelter. The memory settled gently into place alongside all the others. One more stone fitted carefully into the solid, steady wall of his completed service. Part 50. The Weight of Gratitude. As the morning light strengthened further, Marcus found himself thinking less of danger and hardship, and more simply of quiet gratitude for the life he had lived. He thought of Rome itself, vast and imperfect, yet steady enough to have given his own small, ordinary life a shape, a purpose, and a lasting community. He thought of the roads that had carried him safely across so many miles, the bridges that had held firm beneath his tired feet, the walls that had sheltered him. He thought of Livia's patient letters, of Aemilia's distant, unknown life, of Gaius's steady wisdom, of Rufus's honest counsel, of Felix's warm cooking fire. He thought of every stranger who had briefly become a friend, every enemy who had briefly become, through treaty or trade, something closer to a neighbor. None of it had been perfect. Marcus understood the harder truths of his service clearly: the captives, the losses, the long absences from those he loved most. Yet even holding those harder truths honestly, he felt quietly that his life had been worth the difficult road it had taken across 30 faithful years. He thought of the shape in the fog, patient and still, and felt, for the first time that night, something like calm anticipation rather than uncertainty. Whatever it truly was, memory, spirit, or simply a tired old soldier's imagination, Marcus felt ready now to meet it fully, without fear, without resistance. The sky continued brightening steadily, gold spreading further across the valley, the last thin patches of fog retreating slowly toward the distant tree line. Marcus breathed in deeply, feeling the cool morning air fill his chest fully, grateful simply to be alive, healthy, and standing at the edge of something new. He glanced once more at the young guard beside him, feeling a quiet warmth toward this stranger who had unknowingly shared his final, significant night of service. Soon dawn would fully arrive, and with it, whatever remained of this long night's quiet, patient mystery would finally, gently reveal itself completely. Marcus felt no need to rush that moment. He simply stood, steady and calm, grateful and ready, watching the fog continue its slow retreat toward the waiting trees. Part 51. The Young Soldier in the Fog. The sky began to change slowly, the deep black easing into a soft, tired gray along the eastern hills, though the fog still held the ground. Marcus felt his eyes grow heavy, not from sleep, but from the weight of 30 years finally settling gently onto his shoulders all at once. Then quietly he saw the shape again, closer this time, standing just beyond the reach of the torchlight, still and calm within the mist. His hand tightened on his sword, old instincts rising fast, though something in him, something calmer, told him there was no danger here tonight. The shape did not move closer, and it did not retreat. It simply stood, waiting, patient, the way the fog itself seemed to wait. Marcus stepped forward slowly, his knees stiff with age, his breath visible in the cool morning air, curling softly upward like smoke. As he neared, the fog thinned just enough to reveal a figure, young, no older than 17, dressed in armor Marcus recognized immediately as his own. It was the same armor he had worn on his very first day, polished bright, unscratched, untouched by war, by weather, or by time itself. The young man's face was his own face from decades before, calm and unafraid, eyes bright with a hope Marcus had almost forgotten he once carried. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing that needed saying, only a long, quiet look passed gently between the old soldier and his younger self. Marcus saw in that young face every road he had marched, every fire he had shared, every fear he had slowly learned to carry with grace. The young soldier gave the smallest nod, calm and knowing, before turning slowly back toward the fog, unhurried, exactly as he had once marched into it. Marcus watched him go, step by quiet step, until the mist folded gently around him, and the young man disappeared completely into the pale morning light. In that moment, Marcus understood something he had never fully understood before, not in 30 years of service, not in 1,000 quiet watches. Rome no longer needed the young man he had been. That man had already given everything he had fully, and Rome had received it all. What remained now was simply memory, warm and lasting, folded gently into the great, unending story of the empire he had served. Marcus stood alone again on the wall, calm and still, as the fog began slowly to lift from the sleeping fields below the tower. Part 52. The Bugle at Dawn. The first true light of morning touched the hilltops gently, gold and quiet, spreading slowly across the damp fields beyond the wall. Somewhere within the fort, a bugle sounded, low and clear, calling the new watch to their posts, marking the end of a long and quiet night. Marcus heard footsteps on the wooden stairs behind him, steady and familiar, new soldiers arriving to take the places that he and the young guard had held. He turned to look at them, fresh-faced and alert, much as he himself had once been, standing at this very same post so many years ago. Slowly, he reached up and removed his helmet, feeling the cool morning air for the first time in decades without the weight of iron above him. He lifted his face toward the brightening sky, closing his eyes briefly, letting the soft warmth of sunrise settle gently across his tired features. Rome is no longer mine, he thought quietly, though the words felt more like peace than sorrow, more like rest than loss. I am now Rome's memory, he told himself, calm and certain, a single thread within a much larger, endless story still being written. Below him, the fort continued its quiet morning routine, soldiers moving to their duties, smoke rising gently from cooking fires, life beginning again as it always had. Marcus walked slowly down from the tower, his legs stiff, his heart unexpectedly light, ready at last for a road that led homeward toward Livia and rest. Behind him, the young guard remained at his post, steady and calm, carrying forward the same quiet duty that Marcus had carried for 30 faithful years. The fog had fully lifted now, revealing green hills, a distant winding river, and the long straight road that Roman engineers had built with such care. Marcus paused once at the gate, looking back at the wall, the tower, the fading torchlight, holding it all gently in his memory one final time. Then he turned and walked forward into the soft morning light, leaving behind not an ending, but simply another quiet chapter, folded gently into Rome's long story. The empire would endure long after him, built by countless soldiers like Marcus, each one carrying a small, quiet piece of its vast and patient history. And somewhere far to the north, another young soldier stood watch on another foggy night, listening closely, just as Marcus once had, to the calm, ancient voice of Rome.